Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of The Future is Here, if you like. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Chris Farquhar, who, despite his youthful looks, has actually been in our sector for quite some time. In the late 90s and early noughties, he was the managing director of NFO in Asia. He, since then, started up both Cido and Cimigo, is now managing director of Cido and is managing partner of Cimigo, based in Hong Kong. And as I think we all probably know, Asia sees the future much earlier than we do. So welcome, Chris, and thank you so much for spending a bit of time with us today.
Pleasure to be with you.
Chris, COVID is, of course, the hot topic of conversation around every desk, around every table, and any other venue that, virtual or otherwise, that we're in. How was 2020 for you in the business? How did the year end up?
Uh, like everywhere, it's been a tough time for sure. We've experienced across Asia, we've experienced varying levels of impact. Some places down by sort of 10, 20%, and other places a bit more drastic. In the case of China, for example, when we talk about Asia, we've got to remember that it's just so diverse and so large. China, despite having some very tough times when COVID first hit, managed to pretty much isolate, close down the borders, and that domestic economy has roared back to life. So China's been doing very well since then. So arguably, what COVID in China. Other places have been far more affected throughout the region. India, for example, is doing it very tough at the moment, and huge case numbers there, unfortunately. So they're struggling. And then we've got other markets that are also somewhat self-contained. So Vietnam has done incredibly well to keep their case numbers down. I think it's just a couple of thousand that they've had through the whole country on a population of close to 100 million. Believe it or not, I mean, it's just phenomenal. Yeah. So Vietnam is a standout within Asia, along the lines of the much lauded sort of New Zealand model. Vietnam's done incredibly well there. So businesses most definitely been affected, and a lot of sectors have been, have done it really tough. And because the way that our firm operates, we're dealing with many different sectors across the different markets. It's a bit of a mixed bag. So in some countries, we've been, all the travel and tourism related research, for example, has been very badly hit. But financial services and the record number of IPOs that are coming out of mainland China have buoyed that. So, it's a mixed bag.
And I should have perhaps, asked you to clarify that a bit at the start of this. But clearly you're in a large number of countries in Asia. And as you rightly point out, they've all behaved a little differently or reacted a little differently to COVID. Of the countries that you are in, excuse me, is there a common trend? Is there any sort of separation where you can say, well, Southeast Asia was actually worse hit or better managed, or are there any patterns like that in the region, or is it just entirely dependent on whatever decisions the governments took?
I think it's entirely dependent on which the decisions and other factors, not necessarily government related. So some markets, as I said, you take the case of Vietnam, they've done incredibly well there. A similar population size in Thailand or elsewhere in Southeast Asia, they haven't done anywhere near as well. So I don't know that we could sort of ring fence off certain geographies or parts of geographies and sort of say, well, that's just what was happening in that part of the world. In some cases in Oceania, they've done very well, and that's clearly been down to the actions of the government. I think in certain places in Asia, you could say that there's been a large part of the success, if you can call anything in the COVID era successful, but a large part of the success that we've been able to have is due to the self-discipline of people there. So if you take Hong Kong and Singapore and Taiwan and Korea and Japan, where people are very comfortable wearing masks from day one. That clearly kept the numbers down in those markets and has led to them having a more, again, successful pandemic than other markets, perhaps.
And that's true. You've echoed a point that was made in my last discussion as well about the fact that Singapore, I think probably of many of the countries, for anyone looking from the West, where clearly Singapore is a country where many companies have established operations, it seemed to be able to continue to operate reasonably well through the pandemic.
Yes, and I think again it comes down to the self-discipline of people, but also that people were there's a fair degree of trust, particularly in Singapore, trust in the government. So when the government said, "Look, we need you to stay home for shortened periods of time," and as they termed it in Singapore, they were having their circuit breaker. People just sort of said, "Okay, well, that's what we need to do, and that's what they're the actions that we'll take." So we'll work from home, and despite them living in very different, having very different living circumstances to what you might experience in the West, small apartments, multi generations in the same apartment, very cramped space. They all just sort of knuckled down and said, "Right, this is what we have to do." And that's true also in other places in Asia as well. I'm thinking particularly of Hong Kong.
And let me come back to that in a moment. So just to round off, if you like, the financial performance, the business performance, 2020 was down in most markets. Looking into 2021, is it a year of recovery? Will we get back, or will you get back to the levels enjoyed pre-COVID? Or what's the sort of the business horizon as you now see it?
Yes, I think from a regional perspective, I'd say it's a year, 2021's a year of recovery. Taking sort of cherry picking each market, it's a different story. So if you take Hong Kong, for example, where we had prior to COVID, we also had a year's worth of social unrest as well, which meant that it were very turbulent times, and that had a big impact for many clients and for us in the research profession. So we don't look at sort of recovery to 2019, we look at recovery to 2018 sort of figures in the case of Hong Kong, and China's just sort of motored on ahead. They haven't sort of, they haven't felt the effects anywhere near that we have elsewhere in the region. So I think overall, and from a regional perspective, I think it's 2022 that most of us are looking to for getting back to whatever your previous normal was. That's about the sort of time frame.
And I mean, you make the point equally that China has motored ahead quite dramatically. Clearly, it is now, it is becoming, if you like, the economic not just the regional, but the global superpower that it has always threatened to be, it would appear.
Mm-hmm. Well, threatened or promised.
Well, yes, true. Semantics, absolutely.
Yes,
absolutely.
yes.
So look, you talked about working from home and some of the restrictions. I think for certainly in the US, working from home was probably a more prevalent trend than it might have been, say, anywhere between Western Europe through to probably the Middle East or possibly even edges of India. And that sort of block were much less, I think, used to adopting working from home practices. Clearly now that everyone has had to work from home during lockdowns of various durations and strictness, many countries are dealing with or having to deal with the challenge of, will people want to come back to the office? Will they want to work more from home? Will they want to have set up a home office, etc., etc.? How do you see that trend developing in Asia, where, as you rightly pointed out, houses and apartments can be smaller, perhaps not all the infrastructure is there, but how do you see that trend evolving in the Asia Pacific region?
Again, country by country. I mean, it's very. I mean, if you take, say, you take Indonesia with Jakarta, which has some of the worst traffic you've ever possibly come across, and the fact that people need to spend insufferable amount of time just stuck in traffic and commuting, it's horrendous. So, for many people, assuming that they've got the economic means, and for our researchers and our people, there's a bit of a blessing there that people can work from home, and that saves a lot in terms of having more sort of productive hours and the ability for people to be able to spend more time with family if they've got a large enough place. But in other places, locations in Asia, Hong Kong and Singapore, Macau, people have tiny apartments. They really do. And there's a sort of sense of relief, I think, for many people that they could come back to work. Because, sitting on the edge of your bed or propped up by pillows and trying to attend your third and fourth Zoom call of the day is just not conducive for anyone to get anything done. So having that break and interacting with colleagues, sharing ideas and getting into an office environment just to have that separation is really important for many people. And for others elsewhere in the region, having the break and having the ability to, if they do have the space to work from home, great. They're very happy for that. And I think one of the big shifts that from a business owner's perspective is that we've just come to realise that efficiency is not lost, productivity is not lost, and it is absolutely fine for us to move into this new world of people having a mixture of if those that want to come into the office, great, and those that want to work from home because of practical reasons, then fine. And we don't see it as any kind of negative. It's making life easier, so wonderful.
Now, a linked debate to that is the suggestion that many companies will have to reduce their fixed cost base and move it into much more of a variable cost base to give them greater flexibility should the next or when the next challenge arise. Many discussions center around property and office space, and linked to the fact that if more people are working from home, perhaps companies will want to have less real estate, if you like, under their belt. Again, is that a debate which is going on in the countries that you're in Asia Pacific, or given the desire to move back to offices from in those countries where space is less prevalent in homes, is that kind of just it's not a point for discussion at all? We just want to go back to the office and keep the office as it is.
See, I wouldn't see it. I wouldn't characterise it as a debate. I think it's from the business management perspective. I'd say it's brilliant news, absolutely brilliant news. The more flexible that we can, have in terms of our setup, all the better. And when I say that people want to come back to the office, again, it's from a very flexible perspective, whereby it's shared offices, sort of hot desks, and it's offering people the ability to come in to work from the office for those that really want that. But the flexibility and agility in moving people around, and hearing that someone's changed their mind on a Tuesday morning that how they want to structure the rest of their work week, fine, no problems, we can accommodate that. But if we can downsize the office space across the board by 35%, then that's just an enormous saving for the businesses, and we're all under greater economic pressure. So it's not a debate for us. It's just great. Bring it on. Let's reduce those fixed costs. Absolutely.
Brilliant. But so therefore that's already in your planning in terms of looking forward. That is certainly one of the areas that you're saying, okay, this is an option for us.
Yes, for sure. And we're taking action on that right now. And in some of our markets, well, in the case of again Hong Kong, we're 2.5 years now into turmoil, not just 1 year. So, office leases are coming up, and it's the time to make these decisions. And quite frankly, all of our clients are doing the same thing as well. So that there isn't that risk associated with sort of downsizing in the office space. All the clients are moving to a similar kind of hybrid approach. So if they're doing it, then it makes sense for us to be doing the same.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Speaking of the clients, Chris, have you seen a change in demand, in expectations, and in almost like aspirations from the clients over the course of the last? Well, I guess as you say, it's 2.5 years, but has that been amplified or accelerated in any way through COVID?
Yes. So there's the good and the bad. We've got clients who very clearly are a lot more value conscious. Those that are changing their payment terms. I've tried to be as diplomatic as I can here. The guys who are really sort of pushing agencies much harder than what they have in the past, and that makes life more difficult. That's the reality. That's obviously on the negative side from our perspective, but on the positive side for us and for the research profession, I've found that clients are a lot more amenable now to new approaches, new methodologies, taking more risks, and that's a great thing, because we are quite a innovative bunch in research, and we've got some great new ideas and new methods and new ways of sort of unearthing insights. And in some of our markets, clients tend to be a little bit more conservative, and that has really been a really noticeable change in the last 12 months or so, that clients are sort of saying, yeah, okay, well, I know you talked to me in the past about that new approach, let's give it a try now. So it's great from that perspective that clients are much more open and willing to have discussions that they, I think in the past, would just be too risk averse to hold those good discussions.
And I guess one one of the interesting dynamics, of course, in our sector is that they also tend to be, once the client asks for it, it behoves us all to kind of shift and move into that phase of evolution or whatever it may be. So
Yeah,
hopefully that's a good thing in terms of allowing us to continue to hone our offerings, if you like. And
absolutely.
are there particular themes that are coming through in some of those evolving demands? Again, a couple of comments that I've heard recently is that 2021 will probably be the year of the platforms. Now, I'm always a little wary about saying this because I think we had the year of the mobile at least 10 years running. So I don't want to be caught in that particular time warp again. But are there themes that are coming through that you've noticed?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So around here we're calling it when we come out of this, it's a sort of planet platform. They're all the discussion. That's what everyone's talking about now, and it's a great thing. We're very excited by the partners that we're working with in terms of the software providers who have been working on developing platforms, the reception that we're getting from clients, the interest that we're getting from clients in terms of take up of new platforms. And I think we're just at the beginning of this. I think the evolution that's going to come along of the platforms, it's a really exciting time. I think our ability to tap into insights much faster and provide this sort of speed of data, which is what clients have been asking us now for the last 5-10 years. It's speed. It enables us to provide exactly what they've been asking for. So brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So there's that. It's Planet Platform, and it's just a lot more receptiveness to try online, everything online. Group steps, everything, all sort of interaction to be online. And at the same time, I've got to say that we've still got plenty of clients who value a face-to-face interview, albeit with tablets and everything else. But clients still understand that humans still interact occasionally, face-to-face, and they're still interested in gathering feedback in those forms as well. So it's a mixture. But as I said before, clients are a lot more interested in talking about new approaches now.
So, if you had to, if you had to put your bet on where you felt that demand was going to be in 2 years' time, so back to 2022, when we're back to whatever the old normal is and we're in the new abnormal or the new strange, how do you see the split of the business being between what might have been the traditional mix and what the new mix will be?
I think depending on how we're defining the traditional, because I see it as us using technology in a way to enhance the traditional. I don't know that we're necessarily going to change. We're not. It's not about sort of. It's not about a shift to say, well, we're no longer doing any more postal interviews, and I'm old enough to remember those, or telephone morphing into dial-up telephone morphing into Caddy and Caddy moving on. It's not about a complete drop. I think it's about using technology to gather the insights or enhance the information that's gathered by some of the more traditional means, using the technology to enhance that, and then speed to client, just improve that whole processing speed, enable us to probe and to get more information from customers, to enhance our knowledge of what they want. So I don't know that it's necessarily dropping one to take up another. I think it's about improving what we have been doing in the past. And I don't see that, the platforms are pulling together the data gathering all the way through to the data presentation, but that's not anything new there. It's what we've always been doing. It's speeding up the process and connecting a lot more of the elements within the research process. There's nothing kind of earth-shatteringly new there. Technology's enhancing, but it's not necessarily opening up a whole new area to us.
And that's interesting, isn't it? Because it's always been that kind of traditional debate or discussion again around AI. Does it take my job or does it enhance my job? And I think that's always depending on which side of that particular debate you fall, it's either a new era of opportunity or a new era for running for cover. So let's hope it's one of opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. I'm a very strong believer that it's an opportunity for us. And just on that, I can't think of a better time than now when you think about for market research. We're really on the crest here of the wave. Who knows where a consumer's at? Who knows where a customer's at right now? I'd like to be able to put up my hand and say I do, but we really don't. and certainly none of our clients do. So this is potentially a golden age for us, where the insights profession, where we can explain how certainly behaviours change, but attitude, more importantly, has changed, and where people will be going to access brands, where they'll be going to how they'll be going about interacting with brands, how they'll be exploring knowledge in the future. All of that has changed. Everything we thought we knew is gone. We're as I said, 2.5 years in, but globally we're over a year into this now. And where we all thought that this was an initial interruption, I think everyone now realizes that we're in a medium-term change in human behavior, and human attitudes have all fundamentally had to change. So what a brilliant time for market research to assist everyone to understand customers all over again.
And by the way, it's a lovely point, because you're absolutely right. All of the established ways of whether it's working, whether it's shopping, whether it's entertainment, whether it's meeting family, have all had to maybe not reset, but certainly go through a whole new definition of what that entails. And I don't think we're at the end of it yet, as you rightly point out. And it's a super ad, actually. Thank you for pointing that out.
Just again to add the point of that, because I was just discussing it with someone the other day. If you look at what's coming in terms of the technological changes and the benefit of that for market research, it's phenomenal, particularly 5G. I mean, when that gets properly rolled out, and once consumers start accessing, start using 5G, but to access for purchase, to access for communication, to access for entertainment, everything then changes. The ways that we speak to consumers and the opportunities that we've got to talk to them, all of that changes. And it's hundreds of times faster. It's not just, we're not talking an incremental change here. It's a big step change.
Yes, and I think I was lucky enough to listen to somebody from Huawei talk at one of the next web conferences or whatever a couple of years back, and even then what they were envisioning was extraordinary, and I suspect by the time it comes into practice it'll have exponentially increased again. So if we thought this was a reset, wait till 5G comes along, as you rightly say. Right. Chris, as I mentioned, I think at the start, many people, not just because of the fact that the sun rises earlier in terms of the world clock in Asia, but Asia has experienced much more, I think, than other parts of the world, in whether it's in terms of viruses, practices. People are much more accustomed to wearing masks, are more trusting in governments. If there were, quite apart, and I'll come to the final question in a moment, but if you're a business owner in either the US or Europe looking to a potential expansion in Asia, what would be your piece of advice? Because I think it is still it is a massively growing business center. It's one that seems to be far more adaptable to some of these crises, particularly if you look at how Europe is currently performing, which is an absolute disaster. But what would be your recommendation to somebody looking to say, yeah, I'd like to expand into that market, accepting that it's multiple countries?
Had a conversation with a client this morning on this very asked me the exact same question. I'll give the same answer. They're in the production. Because of the diversity across the Asia Pacific region, I would suggest that anyone who's thinking about Asia, and the fact that we've got such fast-growing, recently, not everywhere, but recently sort of technologically enabled markets these days, I would say choose a market and go for that market. And the typical approach in the past has been come to Hong Kong or Singapore and set up operations here and think about that this will be your regional base, or maybe Australia or somewhere else in the region. But I would say these days that there's just such an opportunity within each domestic market that choose one and go for that. That would be my advice. And understand that what works in Korea is not necessarily going to be what's working in the Philippines or in Indonesia or anywhere else. So choose a market that makes sense. Do your research on what makes sense for you there, and then go for that. Because I think the mistake that many outsiders make with the region is they come in and they try and set up a regional presence, and it's just such a struggle for them because there's incredible amount of diversity in the market, so across the various markets, and that's been the failing of many of the very impressive companies from elsewhere in the world, but they've come to Asia and they've struggled in that area because they just haven't had enough focus.
And indeed, I think I've probably been guilty of that in this chat too, because we refer to Asia as almost a singular entity, in much the same way as we often, or rather people who are not aware of the continent would refer to Africa, thinking that Africa is a single country as well, which clearly it's not. And there's such a wide diversity, as you say, of culture, of business environment, of technological infrastructure, etc., etc. So, good thoughts. On a similar vein, and I know you and I have chatted about this before, but if we've probably survived or experienced more changes in the sector than constancy, if you like. If you were to meet an entrepreneur nowadays and he's thinking of setting up his business, knowing everything that we've gone through, what would be your one piece of advice to them to say, look, things don't remain constant; they do change. So if you're setting up in the business, then what would be your golden nugget for them?
Okay. Well, my golden nugget, before I get to it, my golden nugget is a four-letter word, but I'll come to that in a second. So the advice that I was given, and I think it's still relevant, many years ago, was, you're going to start a business. You need aspiration, you need inspiration for those that will be working with you, and you're going to need a lot of perspiration. And I don't think anything's changed with those three. They're still absolutely vital and relevant today. But the key thing that I've learnt the hard way, and again, I've been advised this, and I always feel like it's incumbent upon me to pass it on to others, is that four-letter word, which is cash. Cash is the most important thing you're going to need. You can be the best leader, you can have the greatest ideas, you can be as motivational and as well connected as you like, but if you don't have cash, then everything dries up. So focus on that from an entrepreneurial perspective, because I've seen so many people over the years that have had, really smart ideas, and I thought that they really deserve to succeed. But when the cash runs out, that's it. It's game over. So cash, and cash.
I love the four-letter word. Chris, thank you. I mean, as I said to you, I think so many of us look to the Asia Pacific region as the people who witness first, who experience first, and who learn first from all of the changes that are going through. So thanks for taking a little bit of time today to share some of your thoughts and your views on what is going on and what we can learn. I'm going to ask you just for any final thoughts in a moment, but it was rather interesting. I was watching a documentary a couple of nights back on experiences through COVID, and they interviewed two couples one who lived in Wuhan in China, and another couple that lived in another city whose name I forget. But their constant theme throughout the interview was frustration, because they said, look, we've learned how to control the virus. Why did nobody else watch? Why did nobody else listen? Why did nobody else learn? So, and I think indeed, if you look at the way lockdowns and other mechanisms for controlling the virus have been instituted across different countries, there's been absolutely no consistency whatsoever. And yet we have ideal examples of how it did work in Asia, and yet we never learned. So thank you for sharing some of your learnings. And I guess before I just say a final goodbye, any last words, any last thoughts from your side of the world to this side of the world?
Well, what would I say? Oh, well, on the theme of optimism, I've just had my second jab a couple of days ago. So, being sort of ahead of the curve, I don't expect anything's going to be changing for me and my family in terms of the daily life. But we will get through, and someone who is weeks or months even ahead of others in terms of being lucky enough to get the vaccine into the system. So it gives you a feeling of hope, and I'm sure that once we just get up to herd immunity, things will come back gradually, but we'll also be a lot smarter. And I think in our profession we will have learned a lot from this. And as I said before, I think it's a brilliant time of opportunity for us in market research.
And maybe a final question that just arises from that, Chris. Has there been any talk in any of the regions or any of the countries that you're dealing, because the vaccination program is progressing, how is that impacting on travel? Have they come up with ideas of, vaccine passports or things like that to try and facilitate travel within the region, or is that still fairly, locked down and restricted as it was in the past?
As far as I know at the moment, the only travel bubbles that we have are between Australia and New Zealand. There's been a lot of talk about a travel bubble between Singapore and Hong Kong, which would obviously facilitate a lot of business if we could get that open, and other discussions about Macau and Taiwan and Korea. And it was going to be Japan as well, but they've seen a spike in numbers recently as well. So, no, international travel is still really, really, really limited at the moment. Domestic travel within China, for example, yes, absolutely. It's I think Hong Kong and Singapore airports, I saw the figures the other day, we're down 98, 99% on year. So there's just nothing going on. And they're the two regional hubs. So if the numbers are that low, then it just tells you what's happening. But China's doing, again, like the things, there's a lot of domestic travel happening within China. So that's still going on.
Well, let's keep fingers crossed that it opens again soon, and that indeed we can have, a follow-up conversation to this somewhere in person with a glass of something in hand, be that a cup of tea or something more strong. But thank you again for the time and for the chat today. It's been lovely speaking with you, and thanks for all the learnings. We could all do with learning a whole lot more from what's going on in Asia.
Thanks, Ben.
Now, one point we didn't get time to discuss in our chat was the point on changes in working practices. Chris had in fact mentioned in our chat prior to the interview that they've always allowed people to work from home, although this tended to be more for the more experienced people and for mums, for example, who needed more flexibility with their kids' schedules, etc. They will, however, continue to expand this now for much more of the team. They've also been reviewing their office space requirements, and while they will be putting a much greater emphasis on facilitating flexibility going forward, I think maintaining a place for people to meet, to collaborate, to feel the company culture is clearly very, very important for the company. And I think it's also important to bear in mind that unlike in the West, apartments in Hong Kong and other parts of Asia are clearly much smaller, and it is therefore much more challenging for people to find a quiet workspace in their apartments for themselves. In any case, my thanks again to Chris for joining me today. I hope you found it of interest. And if you have any questions or topics that you'd like to hear a little bit more from other business owners, then please don't hesitate to drop me a line at the email address below, and I'll make sure to include it in future conversations. Thanks again.